In Lagos, Nigeria, a city of endless movement, buzzing traffic, and flashing neon lights, love was in the air. For months, friends and family had been preparing for what many described as the wedding of the year. The bride, Amara Nwosu, was a 26-year-old graduate student pursuing her master's in international relations. Bright, ambitious, and known for her radiant smile, she carried an energy that drew people in effortlessly. The groom, Chika Okafor, was 6 years older, a 32-year-old businessman who had worked his way up from a modest background. He was the firstborn in his family, a man with responsibilities who had long been pressured to marry. To his parents, Amara seemed like the perfect match. Educated, graceful, and from a respectable family. To Chika, she was not just a wife, but also a symbol of stability and success. The couple's love story had begun in church. Chika had noticed Amara at a youth fellowship event 3 years earlier. Friends recalled how he had pursued her relentlessly, sending flowers to her university campus, surprising her with thoughtful gifts, and showering her with attention. For Amara, his persistence had been both overwhelming and flattering. She eventually gave in, and soon after, their whirlwind romance turned serious. The wedding itself was nothing short of spectacular. Held at a luxury event center in Lagos, the hall shimmered with gold drapes, white roses, and chandeliers that sparkled like stars. Traditional Igbo dancers performed as the bride, dressed in a coral-beaded headpiece and shimmering lace gown, was ushered in with song and celebration. Chika, in his custom-tailored white suit, couldn't take his eyes off her. Hundreds of guests attended, from business associates to distant relatives. The atmosphere was electric. Laughter, music, and the constant clicking of cameras. A friend of the bride later said, "You could feel the love." Amara looked like she was walking into a dream. None of us could have imagined the nightmare that would follow. When the priest finally declared them husband and wife, cheers erupted. The couple kissed passionately, holding each other as if they would never let go. As they cut the 5-tiered cake decorated in silver and cream, Amara whispered to her maid of honor, "The Bahamas next. It's going to be the trip of our lives." For Chika and Amara, this was meant to be the beginning of forever. A union blessed by tradition, cemented by faith, and celebrated by hundreds. What no one could see, however, were the small shadows already creeping into the foundation of their love. Jealousy, mistrust, and unspoken fears that would soon follow them across the ocean. The honeymoon destination was already booked. The Bahamas, a paradise of sunlit beaches and turquoise waters. To the families, it was the perfect reward after months of stress and planning. To the newlyweds, it was a promise of bliss. But as their plane ticket read, Lagos to Nassau, fate was silently rewriting their story. The morning sun had barely risen over Murtala Muhammad International Airport in Lagos when Chika and Amara boarded their flight. She wore a simple yellow dress, her braided hair tied neatly back, her excitement visible in her eyes. Chika, in dark jeans and a polo shirt, kept a protective arm around her as if shielding her from the bustling crowd. For Amara, this was more than just a honeymoon. It was her first time traveling to the Caribbean, a dream she had cherished since childhood. She had spent the night before packing and repacking her suitcase, carefully folding sundresses, swimsuits, and even a novel she promised herself she'd finish on the beach. Chika, ever practical, had packed lightly, carrying mostly his camera gear and a notebook where he kept jotting down business ideas. The nearly 20-hour journey, with a connecting flight through Miami, was long but filled with laughter. They took selfies in the airport lounge, toasted with champagne when the flight attendant learned they were newlyweds, and shared whispered conversations about the future. A new apartment in Lagos, plans for children, and dreams of building a life together. When their plane finally descended into Nassau, the sight below was breathtaking. Sparkling turquoise waters stretched endlessly, dotted with white sand beaches and colorful rooftops. Amara pressed her face against the window, gasping. "Chika, look at that water. It looks unreal," she exclaimed. The resort car waiting for them drove along palm-lined streets before arriving at a luxurious ocean view hotel. The grandeur left Amara speechless. Marble floors, chandeliers, and staff who welcomed them with cold towels and tropical cocktails. Their suite overlooked the ocean, where waves crashed rhythmically against the shore. On the balcony, Amara leaned against the railing, breathing in the salty air, while Chica snapped pictures of her glowing smile. For the first few days, life was pure bliss. They lounged by the infinity pool, dined on fresh seafood, and strolled barefoot along the beach at night. Amara loved snorkeling in the shallow reefs, her laughter echoing as colorful fish darted beneath her. Chica preferred sipping rum cocktails by the bar, chatting with other tourists about football and business. Yet even in paradise, tiny cracks appeared. At the poolside bar, Amara struck up a casual conversation with a fellow Nigerian tourist couple. Chica noticed the man laughing a little too loudly at her jokes. His face darkened. Later that evening, as they returned to their suite, he snapped, "Why do you always have to talk to every man who looks your way?" Amara froze. "What are you talking about, Chica? I was just being polite." "You're imagining things." It wasn't the first time she had seen that jealous streak in him. But here, in a foreign land, it felt different, heavier. She brushed it off, determined not to let it ruin their trip. By the third night, the resort staff had started noticing. A housekeeper later told police she overheard muffled arguments from behind their closed door. Other honeymooners, who had befriended them during dinner, remarked that Amara sometimes looked withdrawn, her usual sparkle dimming. Still, to outsiders, they remained the perfect couple in paradise. Pictures uploaded to Instagram told the story of smiles, sunsets, and cocktails by the beach. Amara's caption on one photo read, "Living the dream with the love of my life, 2 hearts, #Bahamas, #forever." What the world didn't know was that the honeymoon was already beginning to unravel, and that paradise would soon turn into a crime scene. For the first few days, the resort glowed with the kind of magic only newlyweds could create. Amara's laughter rang out at breakfast, and Chica proudly introduced her as his wife to anyone who would listen. But by the 4th day, the cracks widened, and the paradise setting only seemed to magnify the shadows between them. It started subtly. At dinner one evening, Amara ordered a second glass of wine, leaning back as the live band played soft reggae. A waiter complimented her smile, and though it was nothing more than a passing remark, Chica's expression soured. His hand tightened around his glass. When they returned to their suite, Amara confronted him. "Why are you looking at me like I've done something wrong?" she asked, tossing her sandals aside. "Because you don't see the way men look at you, Amara. You enjoy the attention," he shot back. Her voice rose. "I married you, Chica. Isn't that enough? Why can't you trust me?" The argument spiraled, their words echoing off the walls of the suite. A neighboring guest later told police he heard muffled shouting and the sound of something slamming against a wall. By the next morning, their smiles looked thinner, forced. Resort staff began to notice. A bartender who served them cocktails by the pool remembered how Amara sat quietly, stirring her drink, while Chica scrolled on his phone, barely speaking to her. When another tourist tried to start a friendly chat with Amara, Chica cut the conversation short, pulling her away with a stiff smile. Tension followed them everywhere. On an excursion to a private beach, Amara seemed to come alive again, laughing as she collected seashells along the shoreline. But Chica kept watching her closely, as if waiting for a mistake. At one point, another tour guide offered to take their photo. Amara posed naturally, resting her arm lightly on the guide's shoulder for balance on the uneven rocks. Chica's jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists. That evening, back at the resort, their argument was louder. So loud that the couple in the next suite knocked on the wall in annoyance. But Amara wasn't silent in the face of his jealousy. She pushed back. She told him she wouldn't spend her honeymoon walking on eggshells. She told him she wouldn't apologize for existing in the world, for talking, laughing, or smiling. One of her last social media posts hinted at the unease. Beneath a photo of her staring out at the ocean, she wrote, "Sometimes even the calmest seas hide dangerous currents." #reflections, #Bahamas. To her friends back in Nigeria, it seemed like a poetic caption, just another beautiful travel photo. But for Amara, it was something more. A quiet confession that she felt something beneath the surface. The resort staff described their shift in mood as like watching a storm gather. Sunshine by day, lightning at night. What had started as whispers and silent glares was escalating into something darker. And soon that storm would break. The 5th night of their honeymoon began with celebration. The resort was hosting a moonlit beach party, a signature event advertised to every guest. Music, bonfires, cocktails, and dancing under the stars. For Amara, it was the kind of night she had dreamed about. The sea breeze lifting her hair, drums thumping in rhythm, couples swaying barefoot on the sand. She wore a flowing white dress that fluttered with every movement, and for a while, she looked like the picture-perfect bride again. Chica seemed determined to enjoy himself too. He held her close as they danced, whispering into her ear. They laughed, posed for photos taken by other tourists, and even shared a slow kiss by the bonfire. To onlookers, it seemed like whatever tension existed had melted away into the night air. But beneath the glow of tiki torches, their troubles resurfaced. At the bar, Amara chatted with a group of newlyweds from Canada. She laughed easily, comparing wedding stories and asking about excursions they'd taken around the island. Chica, who had been waiting behind her with 2 drinks in hand, froze as he watched. His smile vanished. When she returned, drink in hand, he leaned in, his words sharp. "Do you ever stop? Do you ever think how it looks when you're laughing like that with strangers?" Amara's jaw tightened. "I was just being friendly, Chica. Stop making everything a crime." Their voices were low but heated. A couple standing nearby noticed the tension, exchanging awkward glances before walking away. As the night deepened, the arguments grew sharper. Witnesses later recalled seeing Amara walking quickly toward the shoreline, her dress brushing the sand, her shoulders tense. Chica followed, his steps urgent. The music and laughter faded as they disappeared into the shadows of the beach. No one saw what happened next, but some things were heard. A woman staying in a nearby beachside cabana later told investigators she heard shouting carried by the wind. A man's voice raised, a woman's voice screaming back. Then, a sudden silence broken only by the crash of waves. Hours later, the beach was empty. The bonfires had burned down to embers, and the last of the guests had retreated to their rooms. The ocean stretched dark and endless, swallowing whatever had transpired. By sunrise, the island would awaken to a horror no honeymooner could ever imagine. The first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon, casting golden streaks across the Bahamian shoreline. Early morning joggers and resort staff began their routines, unaware that paradise had turned into a nightmare overnight. At around 6:15 a.m., 2 tourists walking hand in hand along the beach noticed something unusual. A figure lay motionless at the edge of the water, waves lapping gently against it. At first, they thought it was someone passed out after too much drinking from the night before. But as they drew closer, their steps slowed. It was a woman. Her white dress, now soaked and clinging to her body, rippled with the tide. Her arms were stretched awkwardly, face partially buried in the wet sand. And then the unmistakable sight of blood. Streaks of red pooled around her hair, mingling with the seawater. The tourists screamed for help. Within minutes, resort security rushed to the scene, followed by local police. The area was quickly cordoned off, but the scene was unforgettable. Amara Okafor, just 26 years old, was dead. Her face bore bruises, a swelling along her left cheek, a cut above her eye. Around her neck were faint but distinct marks, as if hands had once gripped her tightly. The medical examiner who arrived shortly after noted the presence of sand embedded in her fingernails, suggesting she had struggled before collapsing. The blood that stained the beach came from a deep gash near her temple. Whether it was from falling against the rocks or from a blow, investigators could not yet say. But one detail struck them immediately. Her husband was nowhere to be found. Word spread like wildfire through the resort. Guests who had seen the newlyweds dancing the night before were stunned. Some whispered that they had heard shouting by the water. Others insisted they had seen Chica following Amara into the darkness. By mid-morning, the once idyllic beach was crowded not with honeymooners but with forensic teams, journalists, and resort staff whispering nervously. Paradise had been shattered, and the story of the Nigerian newlyweds was no longer about love. It was about death. And as investigators looked at the broken body of Amara, one question echoed louder than the waves crashing against the shore. Where was Chika Okafor? By late morning, the Bahamian police had already launched a search for Chika Okafor. His absence from the resort raised immediate suspicions. Guests whispered, staff speculated, and investigators pieced together his last known movements. It wasn't until 10:45 a.m. that officers found him, walking barefoot along a coastal road about 2 miles from the resort. His shirt was damp, his jeans smeared with sand, his eyes bloodshot. When police approached, Chika seemed dazed, as if waking from a dream. He claimed he had been looking for his wife all morning. Amara went for a swim last night, he told officers in a shaky voice. I waited for her. She never came back. I searched everywhere. I thought she would be in the room. But the detectives noticed inconsistencies right away. If Amara had simply gone swimming, why were there bruises on her face and marks on her neck? And why were Chika's knuckles scraped raw? Grains of sand caked beneath his fingernails. At the station, his story shifted. First, he said they had argued but made up during the beach party. Then, under questioning, he admitted they had fought again near the shoreline. He claimed Amara stormed off into the water in anger while he returned to their suite, assuming she'd come back once she cooled down. Investigators weren't convinced. Witnesses contradicted his story. A Canadian couple said they saw Amara walking toward the water with Chika right behind her. A guest in a nearby cabana claimed she heard a woman screaming, followed by silence. Resort staff remembered the tension between them in the days leading up to the tragedy. Even his physical appearance raised red flags. The scratches along his arms suggested a struggle. His damp clothes didn't match the timeline he gave. And perhaps most damning, he hadn't reported his wife missing until police found him wandering. During the initial interrogation, Chika grew defensive. You think I killed her? My wife? The love of my life? He snapped, slamming his hand on the table. His voice broke into sobs. It was an accident, I swear. I didn't touch her. But as word of Amara's death spread back home to Nigeria, her family voiced their doubts loudly. Her brother told reporters, Amara told me before she left that he was controlling. She said he had a temper. I begged her to be careful. Now, Chika was no longer the grieving husband. To investigators, he was the prime suspect. And what began as a honeymoon was officially a murder investigation. News of Amara's death spread fast. Nigerian media called it the honeymoon from hell. Bahamian authorities faced pressure from both governments to deliver answers. The Nigerian community abroad demanded justice, while Chika's family insisted he was being framed. What was supposed to be a love story became a headline scandal across 2 continents. Investigators uncovered hidden truths. Amara's private messages showed she had doubts about the marriage, telling friends she felt trapped. Chika, meanwhile, was drowning in secret financial debts. The honeymoon, they realized, was less a celebration and more a desperate attempt to save a breaking marriage. In court, the prosecution painted Chika as a jealous, violent husband who let rage consume him. They showed photos of Amara's bruises and replayed witness testimonies of their fights. The defense argued it was all an accident, that she slipped near the water and he panicked. The courtroom was tense, every detail dissected. After weeks of testimony, the jury returned a verdict, guilty of manslaughter. Chika was sentenced to 25 years in a Bahamian prison. Amara's family wept, demanding harsher punishment. Chika's parents collapsed in shock. The dream trip had ended with a coffin flown back to Nigeria, and a groom left behind bars.